All right. Well, welcome to Coffee and Cargo. I see a lot of people are still joining. So we'll kind of start with some introductions, do some agenda talk, and then we'll get into it. But for those who are new to Coffee and Cargo, welcome. We're happy to have you. I hope you guys have a good cup of coffee while you listen in today. So my name's Rachel. I work in the marketing department, as well as Emily Smith. She's our project manager. And then we have Benjamin Schwingle. He is our International Operations Director, and Justin Engelmeyer, who is our Vice President. So Ben and Justin will kind of lead the conversations today. So to get into some agenda, we're going to start with Chinese New Year. I know it's kind of coming to an end here shortly. So we'll talk about what we're seeing, kind of talk about rates, space, trends that are happening, and then we'll get into U.S. ports. We'll touch on the West Coast, the Gulf Coast, and the East Coast. And kind of show you some stats and what they mean. And then we'll kind of end the conversation with some current events. So before we begin, I just want to let you guys all know that we do save time at the end for a Q&A. So as you're listening today and you have some questions maybe on a topic that we're talking about, or just general questions maybe about your current situation, please get them in there. We're going to try to answer as much as we can. And then if we don't get to all of them, if you do leave your name in the Q&A, we'll be able to reach out to you individually to get those answered. So please make sure to get those questions in there. We look forward to them. So we'll get started. Justin, Ben, let's talk about Chinese New Year.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. You know, this time of the year, I always find it interesting because I feel like once Chinese New Year is over, we see the market trends at that point in time, and it's a good forecast as to what's going to happen for the rest of the spring. Is it going to hold strong? Does the market drop off a little bit? So it's always an interesting time of year. Chinese New Year wraps up the 15th, the Olympics on the 20th, but we haven't seen the Olympics really impact us very much. And everyone should be back to work. Well, that's including the Olympics by the 21st. But most of the factories are already back to work. We've been loading containers. But some interesting things are happening. So one is the demand still up? Are we still looking, fighting for space? Probably not as much as before Chinese New Year, just the pent-up pressure and demand of Chinese New Year. I think some of that is a little bit of inflation in general, just because of Chinese New Year. But there is still a high demand. It's still taking roughly a week to 2 weeks out for our bookings. And that's for premium rates. That's for premium space. And then, so let's get into the rates here, and we'll let Ben talk a little bit about that here. But we have two different types of rates. We have our premium services and where those rates are at. And then you have your FAK general standard rates, where that's pushed out a little bit more to, well, I'll let Ben into that, but roughly 4 weeks. But overall, rates are coming down, Ben, right? Rates have dropped a good chunk, especially out of China.
That's right, Justin. And they typically do this time of year. When we hit that relief after the buildup of our holidays through January and the Chinese New Year. As forecasted, there was a dip in the rates, but there's still a premium market because consumerism is high, and it remains high for the last 2 years. So we're expecting that rates will now stay steady through spring with some variation up and down as the carriers decide where they need to move containers most. But for the most part, that relief has hit. Now it's the second half of February. We can start looking at POs that are ready now and in March and plan the bookings accordingly.
And how about the rest of the markets? That's the China market. It's dropped a good, sometimes 30%, maybe even slightly more, or roughly somewhere around that.
That's right.
How about Europe?
Europe is steadily climbing. It's not the leaps and bounds that you see on the Trans-Pacific, but there's no indication that those rates will be coming down anytime soon. It's
Sure.
Europe's like the United States. They import a lot from Asia, and their consumerism is really strong too. So they have a trade imbalance where their export containers need to go back to Asia to refill them and import them again back to Europe. That's fewer containers that are available to go to the United States or South America, where have you. So I always said that they're on a diet, man. They get containers going out, but it has to be a steady, it helps to have some continuity and explain exactly how many per month you need planned out 5 weeks or more in advance if you want to get continual space from Europe to the US?
Sure. So overall here, coming out of China and everywhere else, some of the rates have come down a little bit, stabilized somewhat. But then we have something that I find very interesting to discuss, which are import contract rates. And by that, I'm talking about us, the NVO, freight forwarder, whatever you'd like to call us. We, for the first time, well, at least since I've been in the business for over 15 years, for the first time, we are negotiating our own rates for import rates direct with the carriers. In the past, that's always been controlled in the origin country, so China or Italy or Europe, wherever that it's coming from. Our counterparts over there have been the ones to negotiate the rates, deal with the carriers directly on that issue, and then we work with them. Now you and your team, Ben, are actually working directly with the carriers. So I foresee us having a little bit more control or knowledge on the rates and where they should go up and down, or possibly a little bit more stable. I feel like we will have some more control, but can you touch on that? What are those conversations like thus far with the carriers?
Sure. It goes back to the BCO notion and their contracts with the carriers. That happens ahead of the NVO negotiation. So the BCOs, direct contracts with the carriers, your Walmarts, Targets, massive corporations like that are moving. Well, this year it's a threshold around 5,000 containers per year. Last year, there was 3,000 containers per year for the MQC, the threshold for the contracts. That's creeped up, and what I've gotten from the conversations with the carriers is they are going to, in their own words, focus on higher customer service, but for fewer customers. And that translates to they're going to grant capacity to fewer customers and leaving those with only 2,000 or 3,000 containers per year to go to the NVO market to find that space. They will not allocate a reliable amount of vessel space to the BCOs. That's really important for the NVOs because we operate on our own two sub markets, which is the FAK or the general NVO contracts, as you mentioned, normally negotiated at origin. And the world over, typically, rates are best when you negotiate them at origin. Our export rates to Brazil is going to be much better than anything the Brazilians negotiate at destination. That was the same, as you mentioned, from Asia. But because of the market changes where there's been such a shift, like the premium market, that is bookings that are sold to someone else and maybe even resold again at higher premium prices because that premium price gets the space, more of a guarantee and higher insurance. So we are now taking the reins on the NVO contracts to get our own allotment. And our NVO price, as you can imagine, would be higher than the BCO price. But our commitment from those carriers for space is also greater. The higher price gets the space.
Sure. So to reiterate a couple of your points or to touch on them and to clarify. So one are the BCOs, so your targets, so the large importers, massive. So you're looking at over 5,000 container TEUs a year and really over 8,000. And even a lot of those guys, they're still putting out, they're not getting 100% of the capacity that they need. So they're still reaching out to other people, other NVOs and freight forwarders for the times where they're in desperate need. And,
Absolutely.
and so they're still keeping available space and saying, okay, well, we'll give 10, 20, 30% to these guys and the carriers are going to handle the rest for them direct. And obviously on that open market, then you're paying a little bit more. That's just the way it works. And again, the carriers are going to give the Walmarts that special deal that they don't give really anyone else. But with that being said, to go back to when it's controlled in the origin, and specifically, I want to talk about China for a minute. You talk about the reselling. What you're implying with that is you can have multiple co-loaders, then sell it to an NVO, so our counterpart. So there's multiple parties involved with that buying process before it gets to us, which then is going to add to that bottom line. And at a time when everyone is pushing for capacity and all the importers need their cargo to get here as soon as possible, it puts everyone in a desperate situation of paying whatever it is to get it here. And now that we are going to be able to control some of that, we're hoping that that's going to take care of that and stabilize it to an extent. Take out some of those players that have been buying on top of each other before it gets to the importer.
That's right. For the consistent importer, the one that you can map out the next 30, 60 days of production and cargo readiness. A lot of that premium market is spurred by cancellations. Maybe a factory can't meet a certain deadline and suddenly a booking becomes available. Historically, they would have just canceled the booking and ordered a new one for a week later. But instead of canceling it, that's the booking that's getting resold because that space is now available and it's immediately available because the factory realized maybe a few days before that it was supposed to be ready, it wasn't going to hit that ready date.
Right, and you talk about one booking here or there, but we've seen it countless times, and it starts to add up to quite a bit. I mean, there is a fair amount in that market to get those last minute bookings.
Oh yes, we have an entire team dedicated to scouring that the whole Asian market. All of our partners over there pull together these canceled bookings for our customers.
Sure, and so I guess what you're saying though is for the people that come and if someone was just to call you and I was to say, Ben, I've got X amount, I have 600 containers, and this is our general schedule. That's great, but if I call you out of the blue and say I need 5 right now, and then go away and then call you back 2 months later and say I got 5 more, you're forced to use that premium market, that last second space.
Mm-hmm. You know what? That's actually a good deal usually when the rates are on the rise, because looking at the premium this week could actually save you money than waiting for that sailing 4 weeks from now when prices rise up to that same level anyway.
Sure. No, exactly. Now, one other thing here, because every time we hear about contract rates and now we're going into contracts with the carriers, what does that mean for our customers? Because we're not then in return going to our customers and saying, all right, we signed a contract with MSC, with whomever, with one, and then saying, here's our contract, you go sign our contract.
No, that's not what we would do. Not with the NVO market. And even those year-long contracts are subject to surcharges that will fluctuate throughout the year, and they'll feel bound to some kind of commitment of volume to their BCO or whoever they sign the contract with. The way that our market works is there's adjustments every 2 weeks. So we continually send out those bi-weekly quotes in order to book cargo a week or two in advance as it's required now. And as we quote up and down, as the market goes up and down, the customer just sees there's an honest, fair rate, and there's a steady cooperation with the booking order. Never having to really wait until you see the quote for the cargo that's ready next week or 2 weeks from now. Just knowing that it'll get handled fairly.
So now my next question is, you've been dealing with carriers, you've already been in conversation with them. When is this actually going to start? That's one question. And then my second would be, since this is new that it's coming on the import side, do you foresee, what challenges do you foresee?
Answer your question about the timeline. It's a little different this year. Some carriers have actually started wrapping it up. So rates are available right now in end of February, March. Others will do the more traditional NVO negotiation conclusion around the end of April, so May 1st. There's other carriers that are always available. It's best to talk with your forwarder and see what they have on the table and who they're working with, what kind of commitment they would feel comfortable committing on throughout the year, even if it's just next 60 days.
Sure, and as I said, so as far as capacity goes, do you think that carriers are going to give us everything that we need? Is there going to be something that where they are still giving some over to China, and so it's this kind of middle ground that we're working through? I just being in the industry long enough, I feel as though, yes, this is a great step in the right direction, but let's also understand that there might be, it's not going to be a perfect system the first go around.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, it's not yet to be seen. A lot of listeners here probably remember 2 years ago when carriers basically ripped up those contracts and said we can't honor any of the commitments we made for space. And years ago, when there would be congestion at a Shanghai or Yantian all of a sudden before Golden Week, and containers would roll a week or two, that was a big deal. That was like the news of that quarter, that something got rolled a week. Now that's so frequent, importers are just become accustomed to these long delays and lead times of 5+ weeks before cargo sales. And what I'm saying is that kind of lead time is not necessary, but it is if you're working with the big long contracts, the year-long contracts, because it's yet to be seen how much space will really be granted to those longer contracts.
And our contracts, to be clear again, our contracts are not year-long. Our contracts are going to be an ongoing spot market basis.
Yes, anything that's not premium is
Gotcha.
We'll always get the space.
Perfect. All right. Well, I think that answers quite a few questions on this, but if people do have more questions, I do want you guys to reach out to us. I think it's a different take on the rates and how it's going to be controlled. So if you guys would like to hear more about it, please do reach out to us. Rachel, let's move on to the next slide. I know we have a few more things to get through, the different ports and the congestion that they've had and the increase. Now, the interesting part is if you look at the overall TEUs that's going in and out, that's the combination, that's how much they're working on. It's up. The imports have increased. But if you look at the exports have decreased. So it's kind of put this imbalance in our whole system, which is part of the problem that we've seen in getting capacity. And just so people are well aware of what these stats are showing here, it's imports going into Long Beach, it's imports going into LA, Oakland, Seattle, and Tacoma. But that doesn't mean that that's where they stop. There can be IPI services, so that's your rail inland to Chicago. So while there's an imbalance here, one of the things that I find interesting to point out to some of our customers and people listening is if you have freight in Chicago, if you have freight in Minneapolis, you have freight in certain areas, Kansas City, St. Louis, those areas that needs to get back to the West Coast. This is a unique time where you normally can get pretty good rail rates, but right now, especially, I think you can get some nice rail rates, some intermodal going back to the coast. Ben, do you have some points you want to touch on this?
No, that's a good one. Those are 40-foot containers. So if you're accustomed to trucking a 53-foot trailer, consider 13 feet less of space. But yeah, certainly something we take advantage of. I think the rail in the intermodal way is a very reliable schedule. And if you can accommodate, maybe 5 days from Chicago to Seattle rather than trucking it in 2 or 3. If you have that kind of tolerance in your planning, it's a good way to save some money right now.
Yeah, and it might be 7 overall because you're going to have a day of drayage on each side and stuff, but still, it should equate to about 2 to 3 more days than your normal truckload if that driver's going direct there. But it might offer some good cost savings. And then, Rachel, I know we have a few other ports on this list, the Savannah, Virginia, so some of the East Coast. Everything across the board has increased. Again, exports have decreased. Here you have New Orleans, but New Orleans is so small that, I mean, that's just a part of it. And the carriers with some of those tiny ports, they want to shift it over to the other ports where there's more demand. And then you have Corpus Christi, and I believe that's a row port, correct, Ben?
It is. Yeah. No, in New Orleans, that's interesting. It dropped. That would probably be because there's a flow of cargo that was going through New Orleans up the rail inland, a few carriers, and those carriers realized it was taking too long to get into the Gulf Coast to send it by rail. So they essentially diverted that amount of volume through the West or East Coast. I mean, look at the numbers from Savannah and Norfolk. That is really impressive that those ports will take on a 20 or 25% increase. these are good numbers. I like these two
Yeah,
slides.
absolutely.
Really explains, even 2020 was a busy year. Right? No one's denying that. But 2021 just got that much busier.
2020 was a busy year, and everything increased, and that's even with the better portion of 2 months being shut down coming in from China. I mean, most stuff wasn't coming in for two months. So yeah, that 2020 was also a big year. So this is a huge increase. It's just showing how busy it is out there and the consumerism at the moment. Rachel, do we want to skip ahead to I know you have some current events that you wanted to go over?
Yep, so just due to some time, we have a lot of questions coming in. So I'm just gonna quickly go over these. We typically send out an email the day after our webinars, just kind of for a recap of everything we touched on. So these current events will have more information on that email that you'll all get tomorrow. But just to quickly go over it, Australia is reopening its borders to vaccinated international travelers. That will take effect on February 21st. And then we also have FMC is considering regulating how ocean carriers will be billing their customers on late fees with demurrage and detention. So we will kind of keep updated on what's going on with that. So if you come to our webinar next month, we'll probably do an update for that. And then something interesting that is currently happening. So the deployment of 5G rollout is currently going out. They did postpone the rollout around airports just because they're still trying to figure out whether that will impact airlines. So that's something really interesting, and we'll definitely put some more information on our email regarding that. And then the FTC is investigating large retailers using their size to get around supply chain issues. So this kind of came out in November. There's not too much on it right now, but it is something to kind of keep updated on. They are going to ask some of these large retailers to touch on it. I know that got postponed for another 30 days, but just another topic that we will also put more information on. So before we get into the Q&A, if you have any questions on any of these current events, please put them in there. We'd be happy to answer them too. So Emily, I'll let you take it over and we'll start the Q&A.
All right, lots of great questions. Ben and Justin, are you guys still offering a max rate like we did in December? Where are you guys seeing with that?
I don't see any reason to put a ceiling or a high watermark on prices right now. They are steadily dropping down right now, but as I mentioned before, at the NVO market, quoting fairly as the rates go up and down through the spring is the best way to get customers space and plan ahead.
And I also think that with our own staff, with Ben and his team, with them being able to speak directly with the carriers on this, I think that it'll offer a little bit more stability than we were previously able to have. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this rolls out, but I'm hopeful that we're able to discuss with our customers and give them a better view of what's coming up.
And then kind of to follow up on that, will there be offered a locked rate at all for these, or where are you guys seeing with that?
A fixed rate, well, I'll let Ben answer that, but I haven't heard anything about fixed rates for a full year. There's just so much volatility in the market right now, and there's still a lot of demand. But Ben, you're the one talking to him.
Yeah, fixed rates subject to GRI and PSS, peak season surcharge, and that's been a staple offer from carriers for years and years. But more than ever, that just means you're locking into a rate. They're going to change. The carriers are going to change that price every quarter, and they will decide if the amount of money or how valuable the importer is to them, and that will correspond with how much space they'll give them. So it's available. It's a tool. I wouldn't rely on that tool only.
So if a shipper signed a fixed rate contract for 1 to 2 years max, and then suddenly spot rates started to decrease kind of at a rapid pace, what kind of risk is this for shippers?
A good question. Should have addressed this earlier. The carriers will have fees for shortfall or not hitting your minimum quantity that you agreed to. And that could be several $100s or more, up to $1,000 a container. We've seen of a penalty to the importer for not fulfilling what they can, the contract.
But again, to read,
I would say that you can't I also ask the carrier for space when out, they're not offering it to you.
but also let's not forget here. So when we're talking about these fixed rates, let's talk about there's the BCO rates, right? So again, your Walmart, your Target, those people that they can get rates that the rest of us in this world can't get. But for most importers, even if you're importing 3,000-4,000 containers a year, or you're importing 6,000 or 7,000 containers a year, they're not going to provide all of the space necessary. And there's still this imbalance of when you're in need of even those people. If you have 6,000-7,000 containers, even more, 10,000 containers, there's still that balance where they have to go into that open market. Now, everyone underneath that 5,000, those people are not really signing these year-long contracts.
All right. And
they'd be signing them maybe with a large top 10 global forwarder. That's
sure.
Those contracts are predicated on underlying contract with the carriers. So what space they're getting from the carriers and what will they pass down to their customers.
Sure.
all right. And then our last question here, you guys kind of mentioned that rates are starting to drop. Do you anticipate them staying or dropping for a little bit, or where do you kind of see that timetable going?
I think rates are slowly dropping down into the spring. But every webinar we have, it's a crystal ball analysis. What's going to happen this year? One thing I'd want to get across is 2021 is going to be the same as 2022, roughly. And there will be ups and downs. There'll be more volatility this year than historically.
Perfect. Well, that'll wrap up our Q&A. Rachel?
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. And then just to go to the next slide. So our next webinar is going to be on March 23rd. That's a Wednesday at 10 a.m. Central. And we do offer, if you are enjoying our coffee and cargos and you want to get on a list so you don't have to sign up every month, we do offer a monthly webinar mailing list. So if you'd like to be a part of that, please reach out to me at rachel@InterlogUSA.com. We'll get you on that. And then every Monday before the webinar, we get you on that list so you don't have to go and sign up every month. Again, if there's something else too that you guys have questions on or just want to talk to one of our experts, please reach out to us too. We do have our sales email here on the slide. We'd be happy to get on a phone call and go through some of the topics that we discussed today too. So those of you that did put in questions that weren't answered, we are going to be reaching out to you later today. So we'll be in touch shortly. But thanks, Justin, Ben, Emily, for your time and thoughts today. And then
sounds
we'll
good.
be back
Thanks,
next
Rachel.
month.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you.